His life was one of addiction and destruction. Donald Woods was living a high-risk lifestyle. He battled drug and alcohol abuse for 20 years. He was a drug dealer for 2 decades, making up to $150,000 a month. He got involved in organized crime, spent 4.5 years in prison. Donald lost everything, but then he met somebody that would change everything. Donald, welcome back to 100 Huntley Street.
Thank you.
So you were on here like 20 years ago with David Maines.
Yes, yeah, February of '98.
And Father Bob McDougall, one of my heroes in the faith, was somebody that really impacted your life.
One of my heroes, yeah. Back in '78, 40 years ago, February of '78, I ran into Father Bob McDougall. Changed my life, prayed for me, baptized in the Spirit, and changed my life forever.
So how did you end up with, you're in prison, you're doing drugs, you're selling drugs. I mean, how did you get involved in such a destructive lifestyle?
Born again at 16, then met Father Bob
And
McDougall.
you came to Jesus at 16, yeah?
Yeah, and met Father Bob McDougall, impacted my life. I was in a youth group, and the pastor of the youth group passed away, and we all scattered. And I just ended up going back to a lifestyle I was already into young at 14 and 15 of dealing drugs and doing drugs and I'd quit high school early. I was hanging out in the streets getting high, and I found out that I could make money and make a living selling drugs.
But you had a God consciousness at that time. Was that not, somewhat of a battle? Because you knew what you're doing probably wasn't exactly the best thing to be doing.
What it did for me was it gave me a relationship with God as my Abba Father, that close relationship. But what happened was the fellowship was never always close. So I was like a prodigal son. Even though God was my father and I was a son, I was like a prodigal son. I kept running into the world. And even though I wasn't faithful, God was always faithful. And so no matter what situation I was in, if I prayed, He answered those prayers, or He came and I knew I could experience His presence. He would get me out of situations.
So you're going through this stuff, and yet you're still talking to your Heavenly Father.
The whole time.
Wow.
Yeah, the whole time.
What do you think He was saying to you? Like, Donald?
Well, there were situations where He was trying to get me out of it. Like, for instance, I did get arrested and I did go to prison. But there was other times where I was supposed to go to prison for 12 years and I didn't have to. Another time I was supposed to go to prison for 7 years and didn't have to. Just the grace of God saved me from situations that might have ruined my whole life.
How did you get involved in organized crime? Was that just a progression from selling drugs and then just getting involved with, some pretty dangerous characters?
Yeah, so I went to prison at 17. Back then they didn't have a Young Offenders Act. So I went to prison at 17 and spent the first 2 years of 17, 18, and 19 in prison with every criminal in Ontario. So and you're living with these people, you're eating with these people, so your best friends and your family become the criminals. And so when I got out of jail, I was connected with all these criminals in Ontario. So I had new drug connections, new crime connections, and I always tell people I got into organized crime, and they say, "What's that?" Crime that was organized.
Okay.
And so we lived off the avails of crime.
When you were in prison, Donald, what was your spiritual journey like at that point? Did you just kind of give it up, or?
No, actually what happened was I was in my jail cell one day, and the library person was coming along with a little library cart, and I could take a book. I reached out and grabbed a book. The first book I ever read was The Cross and the Switchblade.
Oh, of
with
course.
Nicky Cruz
Yeah.
and David Wilkerson.
Mm-hmm. And what did that do to you? Was that a turning point for you?
That was another impact. So I had many of those impacts. But that one there, when I read that book, in the back of my mind, I was saying, gee, I would have liked to be like David Wilkerson. I would like to be like David Wilkerson and just change people's lives.
Well, David Wilkerson, Nicky Cruz, amazing people. So when you got out of prison then, what was happening in your life at that point?
So I continually had these times where I would try and straighten my life out. But what I found out, it was more like behavior modification. And what I believe in now is identity transformation. And so that the love of God actually, if we allow ourselves to receive the love of God, it actually transforms us. And before, what it was I was trying to change myself. And then I learned that we can't change ourselves, that only God can change us.
Well, it's like the difference between a Band-Aid and actual surgery.
Right.
And in your situation, it was, as you talked about, just behavioral modification. You're trying to do it on your own strength. At what point did you get to say, okay, that's it, I can't do it, Jesus, I need your help?
I got to the point, the lowest point of my life, I lost everything. So I had some businesses. I got out of the crime and into some legal businesses, but lost those businesses. I was in the bar and restaurant business. But you know, when you're an alcoholic, you shouldn't be in the bar business. Drank the place dry, lost my shirt, lost my wife, my children, and I was down to a bicycle. And in 1995, I rode into Toronto on a bicycle, and everything I owned was on that bicycle.
From Ottawa
To
to Toronto on your bike?
Bicycle, yeah.
Okay,
Everything I owned was on that bicycle.
Wow. Okay, we're going to talk about what happens when you arrive in Toronto and then the life train, you know, what happened in terms of transformation when we come back right after this.